Well, everybody, welcome to Australian Veteran News. And this morning, we're very lucky to be speaking to David Jamison, who has been very involved in the veteran community over many years. He is the president of the Ringwood RSL sub-branch. He's also been involved in the Defence Force Welfare Association and the Alliance of Australian Defence Service Organisations. So a fair bit of involvement and probably a few other things that are in there as well, David. So I might give you a chance just to let us know what you've been doing lately and what your focus has been and any other things you've been working on. So to give a little bit of context to our conversation to anybody who's viewing this video.
Yeah, well, recently I've been concentrating on the Ringwood sub-branch and building its strength financially and its strength in providing support and services in the outer metropolitan area of Melbourne. But also in trying to guide the committee and the state branch through a process to institute a redevelopment of the site that we're on. We're opposite the Ringwood railway station, and from a development point of view, it's rife for a multi-storey development that would allow us to build a sub-branch that is sort of positioned for the future with all the facilities needed to bring the services traditionally provided by the RSL into our area.
Okay, David, so you mentioned, I mean, I know where Ringwood is. A lot of people might not know, particularly our interstate viewers, but Ringwood is a sort of a, as you said, it's an outer Melbourne area. It's about, what, 20, 30 k's out from the CBD, is that right?
It's about 30 k's out from the city, and it's transport interchange, and it's a regional centre, regional business and retail centre.
Yeah. So how important are the outer suburbs to, to I guess, providing support service to veterans and their families?
Well, there are a number of veteran families in the outer eastern area. There are probably three strategic sub-branches. One is Frankston down on the coast, Dandenong midway between ourselves and the coast, and of course the Ringwood sub-branch. They're the three biggest sub-branches in the area, and going into the future will be the bedrock of the footprint of the RSL in this area to provide services to the growing number of veterans that are moving around and settling in the area.
So you say they're strategic. Are they strategic by way of location, or are there other things that they're doing that make them strategic right now, or is this a future sort of oriented statement?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of a future-oriented statement, but in terms of geographic location, where the three sub-branches are well placed to provide a range of services right across the outer eastern area of metropolitan Melbourne. So we need to ensure that the sub-branches are strong. They're focused on providing RSL support to veterans and their families, and they're focused on being an influence in the communities that we serve for the, for the good of the general community at large.
And David, is there collaboration between those sub-branches at the moment in terms of developing that vision, or is that a vision that you hold and you're hoping to share it with others, or how's that been
it's a
playing
vision
out?
that I hold. I've periodically articulated that vision, but it's something that we have to build in the future. One of the issues with the RSL at the moment is that there is insufficient cooperation between sub-branches. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed into the future and should be a focus point for the state branch.
And I suppose it sort of sets that out in the strategic agenda, and I think there is a little bit of that in the latest iteration of the snapshot of a strategic plan that we've seen. I've been a little bit critical of it in some of my articles. Perhaps earlier on I was actually asking where it was, but now we've seen it in some recent notes and or some recent communiques. I mean, what's your view of the substance of that strategic plan? Are the priorities right, or are there other things that need to be focused on?
Look, I really think there needs to be a rethink. We need to get back to reality and just do a re-analysis of where we are, where we've got to go, and how we should go about it. And I think the present strategic plan has probably been produced in isolation by people who haven't been close enough to the people on the ground providing the services and support that RSL provides. So I don't want to be critical, but I think there needs to be a rethought on the whole process.
So particularly, I suppose, we've gone through this incredible period of time in the last, several months now, and it sort of keeps going on through the end of this year. It changes the landscape somewhat, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And that's something that we've all got to come to grips with, because what it is doing is reshaping a lot of voluntary organisations, including the RSL. As we come out of the present round of restrictions and look to the future, we're going to have to do business quite differently. But at the same time, the basic tasks and visions haven't changed. So the mix and the way we go about it is going to have to be tailored to the new situation as that emerges. So we're going to have to be much more agile than we have been in the past. One of the issues that we've got to face is that the way the government is imposing restrictions, particularly on voluntary organisations, is damaging them quite severely. It's damaging them financially, but it's also damaged them in terms of membership and support, because we all rely on volunteers coming in and wanting to be part of who we are and part of the vision that we have. But when you cut them off from that, they go away, and you really got to rebuild from scratch. So we're going to face a bit of that in the future.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things, we might reach into this later, but there's been obviously some criticisms from the reformists. I'm not quite sure how to put a boundary around them, but I did speak to Dave Peterson a few weeks ago about that, and he gave us some insights into some of the reform agenda as a sort of a spokesperson of that group, but not really, because we're not really sure exactly who's in that group. But the criticism has actually been there, and it's been quite strong and sustained about the business model of the RSL Victoria anyway, prior to this current time. And I guess perhaps what they're saying is that the situation that we're in at the moment is proof that the business model is not sustainable and doesn't suit veterans. What do you say to that idea?
Well, I've been critical from the start about the contractual arrangements for gaming in the state. I think in many ways it's distorted the work of the state branch and distorted their thinking processes. Nevertheless, gaming is a reality. It's there. You can't suddenly turn it off and expect to come out of it healthy in the other side of what you do. So there needs to be a transition if we are going to go away from gaming. At Ringwood, we see that we'll have a 10 or 12 year transition period, because we don't see gaming as a viable funds generator to the extent it has been as we go into the future, because the demographics of those involved in the pokie machine area, they're not getting any younger, they're growing old. People of our ilk and following generations these days, they get their entertainment and gaming bugs out of the way on their handheld devices. So, sports bets and that sort of thing is starting to take over, and we've got to be real about that. The other area that we've been looking at is esports itself, and that is a massive and growing area for the younger generations. So, we've been talking to an expert in that field to see how we might perhaps move that way in the future. And in our redevelopment, we'll have a space that we can host esports events at. So that's going to be an interesting thing.
Just to clarify, esports, is that involve gambling platforms as well, or is that a different sort of concept?
It's the video game type.
Okay.
So they, the kids from 12, 14 right up to 30s and 40s get involved in it, and they get a lot of entertainment out of it, and it becomes a fierce competition. And so, in fact, at the esports seminar that I attended, the Asian Games this year, which I think are in Singapore, esports will be an authorised sport, an accredited sport there, and they're pushing to have it included in the Olympics. So, it's that big.
So this is
That
sort of Xbox type situation and that sort of thing, that style of thing where people are competing for, in competition with each other in a venue.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in a venue. Venues can host them, and that's the sort of arrangement we'd be looking at. But yeah, they're in teams. We had an esports convention here last year at the tennis centre. There were 5, I think, pavilions chock full of people either watching esport competitions or looking at the exhibitions by e-gaming providers, that sort of thing.
So without necessarily hanging your hat on that one thing, you're saying that there are alternative business models for the RSL that needs to move to. Is that view held by other sub-branches as well in a similar situation as yours, do you think?
Some of them, others are not really thinking that far into the future. I mean, with our redevelopment, we're looking to build other streams of income, such as a gym, we'll have a pool, have a business centre, have a conference centre. These are the sorts of ancillary, if you like, income generators that we need if we're going to move out of the gaming area.
So I guess Ringwood's lucky they've got somebody with a strategic mindset having a look to the future, but a lot of the other sub-branches don't necessarily have that, and they don't have access to that kind of thinking. They're not used to that kind of thinking. I mean, what's the solution to sort of making sure that that sort of thing can roll out where people can start thinking a little bit more long term rather than just trying to deal with some of the survival issues that, I mean, some of the regional centres are really struggling to actually be viable at all. There's got to be a plan around how to help them through without throwing good money after bad.
You just hit on the $64,000 question about the RSL, frankly. The answer is not a short-term answer at all. It's a long-term answer. We need to build the membership with more recently discharged veterans who have business skills and all the skills that they get in the ADF to recruit people onto the various committees of the sub-branches so that they can begin to contribute. At the moment, you could say in a lot of areas, it's a bit of a time warp. We have people who have almost given their life to work for the RSL, but one of the issues that they haven't been able to overcome is to ensure that we recruit more recent veterans into the league itself. That's not just a criticism of Victoria, it's right across the country.
Yeah, so we've got, I mean, it's pretty hard to ignore, I guess, the Hawthorn sub-branch. It's quite a significant number of younger veterans in it, but it's got a range as well. I mean, there are older veterans in there as well. And most of those that I gather are sort of into the sort of looking for change and looking and feeling a little bit frustrated from what they've expressed, both to me personally, but also what they've been saying publicly and through the unofficial channels of the reform movement. So there's a rift that's growing, isn't there, within RSL Victoria, and there's a real task ahead to try and somehow bring that together. And how do you bridge the gap? Because I think until that gap's bridged, it's going to be very difficult to attract anybody, to attract members into the RSL, and particularly into some of the suburban and regional sub-branches if they're not really offering anything of, what those people consider value, or perhaps even, feel that they're affiliated or should be affiliated with it.
Yeah, well, it's a real issue because it's a two-way street. Unless some of these younger guys and women commit themselves to coming in and being members of the RSL, things are not going to change too much. So it's got to be a combination of those sorts of people making a decision that they want to be involved, they want to contribute to the work of the ex-service organisation, and at the same time having people in leadership areas within the league willing to, if you like, accommodate these people, accommodate their thoughts, and help them develop into the leaders of the future and the membership base for the future. So at the moment, there's none of that reconciliation thinking in the leadership of the RSL. And until that happens, we're just going to continue to struggle. So, one of the things that I see in my role out at Ringwood is that I've got to be a bridge between the old and the new. and try and bring them together. It's very difficult because you're fighting a perception amongst the serving ADF members and the more recently discharged members that the RSL is an old boozy club that is irrelevant to them. It doesn't have their interests at heart. But that really can't change until they themselves determine that they want to come in and be part of the life of the RSL and bring change from within, but also the leadership of the RSL has to provide an environment that makes them feel welcome and feel part of who we are.
So, David, I see as a precursor to all that then that they've got to be able to at least see a pathway to be part of the future. If they can't see a pathway to be part of the future and they can't see potential opportunities to be mentored by people like yourself who've done a great deal for the veteran community, then why would they take that step?
Yeah, well, that's the issue that faces the RSL right across the country, that the national and state leadership don't seem to have understood that they are the ones who are the public voice, who need to project an image of the RSL that's relevant to those generations, that's relevant to the serving members of the ADF, and that the community itself can respect, because it is an organisation that says sensible things, promotes proper goals, and is seen to be an important part of the community and the voice on behalf of veterans. And you know, that's the crucial role that the national and state leadership needs to take up and take very, very seriously. At the moment, it's too inward looking at those two levels. They've got to look outwards. They've got to have an administrative structure that allows the internal working of the RSL network to work properly, to go in the right direction. So they've got to provide the strategic avenue for these people to do their work at that level. But at the same time, they've got to be out and be public and be seen to be a relevant part of Australian society. So,
I mean, from what I'm hearing there, the advocacy part of it is very crucial. It's quite crucial. It needs to offer that voice. Is enough being done at national and state level in terms of advocacy for veterans and families and even current serving personnel?
Look, I can't see it. If it is, it's very quiet.
And I guess one of the other issues is that the voices, I guess, the independent voices are actually quite diluted across many different little organisations having their say. And, you know, there's really, if there's going to be one organisation that probably has the opportunity to create a bigger voice and amplify the concerns of the veteran community, I would have thought the RSL would be that organisation with that voice. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, the RSL is positioned to be the voice on behalf of the veteran community, and it's that to me that's its core role. The problem we have is that our leadership seems to be too close to the establishment, both nationally and across each of the states. If we're going to be an independent voice, we've got to be seen to be independent, not to be seen as an extension of the bureaucracy. And that means that our national and state leadership, they cannot accept sinecures from the government. Government positions, even as advisors, are areas of real danger in terms of being seen to be independent and actually being independent. I mean, the problem in Canberra, for example, is that you get sucked into the establishment and the bureaucracy there. It's very easy for that to happen. You have to fight it all the time. And unless you do that, you're just not going to have an effective voice. And I found that out when I was the national president of the Defence Force Welfare Association, where we collared, I think it's now 19 ex-service organisations so that we could have one voice. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the RSL, it just stood outside that and refused to be part of it, although some of the national presidents I worked with wanted to cooperate. They never really joined the push, and in the end, the national voice of the RSL was not listened to at all. And that's a terrible indictment, I think, of an organisation of our age and spread across the country.
Yeah, I think some of those issues, I mean, to bring it into more practical things, that there are concerns amongst the community. We've written a few articles about it. We've had a number of submissions which we've published from the community about things such as what's the RSL's position on the call for a Royal Commission into veteran suicide. Now, you might have a view on that discussion. I'm not asking you about that at the moment, but the point being is that it's not really super clear whether it's actually even developed a position or whether it's even asked anybody out in the community or surveyed the community about what we think or feel about that topic and that issue. And it is something that is been rotating around the veteran community all over Australia for a very long period of time. And I suppose from what you've just said before, you want to be in a position as an organisation to be prepared to ruffle the feathers against decisions or positions that the government of the day might be taking, and not get involved in the political dimensions of those decisions.
Well, that's exactly right, and unless you do that, you're ignored. I mean, it's frustrating to me at the moment that we don't have the voice that we should have, and the only group of people that suffer because of that is the veteran community. We need to have a voice on the major issues. We need to be heard. And although it might not always be accepted, we need to have a point of view that's understood and communicated right through the RSL network. And one of the issues that this brings out, of course, is that the communication from national to state to sub-branches and vice versa is almost non-existent. It needs to be beefed up an awful lot and needs to be made effective, because it's not at the moment.
Yes, I would agree with that from what I've seen. Obviously, running Australian Veteran News for the last few months, and we've been wanting to get the voice of the RSL into the debate, and it's actually been very, very difficult to coax them out of their shell. I don't know why that is the case. I mean, I think they've got a great deal to gain from, being in a forum like this or contributing a little bit more. They've certainly given us a question and answer situation with from Jamie Twidale, the CEO, but anything more substantial than that's very, very difficult, and you can't have this kind of conversation, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the veteran community would like to hear, and would only benefit those folk, trying to get there, make probably some important points that aren't being heard, that I'd probably like people to hear. I guess the communication thing is, this collaboration thing I wanted to go back to for a second. And this is just from my own experience, David, and you and I met a few years ago when I was involved in that shout out program. And one of the objectives of that program, which was sponsored by Melbourne Legacy, was to try and build some collaboration between the ex-service organisations and try to get some balance into the sorts of things that are going on, and engage better with the veteran community, in recognition that, different organisations serve different constituents. They actually have different constituents, I suppose, in the formal sense, but in the broader sense, they're all serving the same community, whether they're members or non-members. My observation on that is I found that the RSL is either reluctant or incapable of collaborating, and it's a harsh thing to say about them, but that's certainly the impression I've walked away with after a few years of trying to work in that area and try to help build some partnerships between a couple of different organisations. Why is that? Why is it so difficult?
I think it's a cultural thing within the RSL. It sees itself as the only relevant ex-service organisation in many respects, and that's a dangerous position to be in, because whilst you're doing that, you are building resentment amongst the community you're serving and amongst the many other organisations who have a real legitimacy in the long term anyway. And it stops you from being able to effectively garner the voice of the veteran community and present a considered but consistent and unified point of view on a lot of issues.
So I guess this whole thing comes down to relevance again and advocacy. Outsiders or younger veterans. It's actually not even just younger veterans who are discharging now. I mean, there are people of my era, I suppose. I know many who haven't even given a thought to joining the RSL and probably won't ever join the RSL, I can gather, because I just don't think that they've been attracted to it in any way or shape or form, because there's nothing there for them. And there's nothing, and sometimes what I'm talking about, what's there for them is not just what do they get? It's what opportunity do they have to offer something towards it? And if they feel that they don't have something to offer, then they won't be part of it. So, how do you see this rolling out in the future? What do you see as strategic imperatives over the next few years to, number one, we've got to get through the turmoil and the schisms, I guess, the rifts between the generations, which are fairly clear, the reformers versus the old guard, if you like to use that terminology. How do we get through that and bring it together and minimise the damage?
Well, it's like everything else. It all boils down to leadership. If you've got the right leadership there, the culture of the organisation will begin to change. And without a cultural change and without strong leadership, without an understanding of the differences between the various generations and their outlooks, we're going to continue cobbling along the way we are now. So we actually need to stop, take stock of who we are, take stock of who we're there to support, and what we need to do to ensure our viability going into the future. And that means that we have to be much more agile in our thinking. We have to be much more open and embracing for people who have different points of view within the veteran community, and begin to embrace them and give them a voice. Without that, we're not changing at all.
So one of our contributors sort of likened it to some kind of a CheckNAV, in a very simple military terminology. Let's stop and take a look and see where we're at. And even though we've got, I guess, an outline of a strategic plan and all those sorts of things in place, David, I'm guessing you're saying we still need to do that CheckNAV and have a serious look at where we are and take stock of a number of things, but we also need to work out how we're going to link the different interests and generations or whatever across the organisation. One of the concerns I have is how do the leadership bring in and repair some of that damage, because some of these things that have happened in recent times have been deeply some of the attacks have been quite personal, and they've been, people have been hauled through to tribunals, people have been abused on social media. I mean, it's been quite a horrible situation on all sides. What's the approach?
Well, first of all, we've got to stop taking offence at what others are saying. It's not about us. It's about the task that we're all collected to perform. And people are going to have strong views. We've got to let them express those strong views. When they're wrong, call them out. When they're right, embrace them. And stop looking at individuals from a personal point of view. Separate the individual from the issue, and you go a long way to making progress. And I think these sort of attacks that are being mounted at the moment by the reform group are coming out of pure frustration, because they can't see that they really have a voice that's having an impact and that things are going to change. So, it's easy to criticise them, and I have criticised them the way they present their cases, and some of their information is factually incorrect. But at the same time, it's legitimate that they express their opinion and try to institute change in an organisation that desperately needs it.
So the response to some of that, I understand there's people that get certain sorts of letters saying that they might be considered for tribunals and things like that, because there's some rules about not speaking out and various other things, some conduct unbecoming and so forth. Are they good responses to the situation? I mean, are they worthy responses? Is it good to remove the bad apples, so to speak, out of the organisation if they're causing some trouble and upsetting people? Is that a legitimate response to an issue of recalcitrance or that kind of thing?
Well, first and foremost, we've got to remember we're a volunteer organisation. Our membership are essentially volunteers. They're there because they want to be there. And the only way that you can engage in them is on the basis that a volunteer is talking to a volunteer. We've got different tasks within the organisation, and you can influence and try and guide people. The resort to disciplinary processes, to my mind, it's a last resort taken very, very rarely and under the most extreme circumstances, because we're not a command organisation. I mean, we've all come out of a command organisation.
Well, even David, in a command
transition to being a volunteer.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, David, when you were just saying that, I was just thinking about even, I don't know, maybe things have changed a little bit, but even in my day in a command-oriented organisation, a serious disciplinary matter was something that was taken as a sort of a last resort as well, because it came down as you know, to the officers and the NCOs that, you know, you've got a leadership problem if you have to put your people on charge and do these sorts of things. So there's the first thing to look at is what's going on in your organisation and with your leadership, and that's an old lesson from a long time ago, and I'm assuming hopefully they still teach that kind of thing in our leadership training and that kind of thing. But it's a really important point. I'm worried that by invoking disciplinary action, I mean, not everybody's got the benefit of experience, the benefit of ready access to mentors, and not everybody's, you know, necessarily in the right sort of state of mind in terms of some of the things that they do as well and some of the behaviours that they perform, and that's part and parcel of our community as well. So there's got to be some way of who's got to be bigger here, and how do you make soak it up, I suppose, and show people a better way rather than try to deal with them through an administrative process.
Well, I guess one way to look at it is those with the greatest responsibility have the greatest ability to give and to allow others to express their point of view and be part of the organisation. So, as I said before, taking offence is not a luxury that leaders in voluntary organisations should accept. They should not, under any circumstances, take personal offence, because it's just not helpful to anyone, let alone those that are giving offence. Because, as you say, a lot of those who do it, they've had some horrific things happen to them. It's impacted their life, impacted their way of thinking, and impacted their health in a whole range of areas. So, you know, you've got to cut them a bit of slack.
Yes, indeed. All right. So I guess I'm wanting to understand a little bit more about, I mean, I'm trying to, in my mind, try to paint a picture of what the future might look like and how we can get there. I mean, what can you see the next few years potentially looking like, if it's going to be, you know, the good picture of the future rather than a dim view? What might be achievable?
Well, I think what might be achievable is a revamp of the Victorian State Office to turn it into a service-oriented organisation rather than, and it has been a command organisation where state officers said and the sub-branches have jumped. Well, you know, that's not a viable proposition anymore. What has to happen is the state office needs to see itself as the support for the network of sub-branches where the work of the RSL is done, and do what they can to ensure that the sub-branches can get on with their business. They have the resources they need. They have the business plans in place to ensure they have a future in the next few years, and that's not going to be as easy as it sounds. And we need a total culture change within, firstly, the state branch, but also, I think, right across the RSL. We need to understand that we're there for others. We're not there for ourselves. It's not what we get out of it. What we get out of it is secondary, and it should be related to our ability to provide support and help for others in the community, particularly the veteran community.
So this is pretty widespread. It's going to require everybody to be involved pretty much to achieve those goals.
Yes, it has to start from the top. If it doesn't start from the top, it's not going to happen. I mean, I was involved in my last job in the Army, I was involved in changing the culture of the Army's procurement organisation. And that was a pretty tight-knit group of people, tight boundaries around it, but it still took me 3 years to change the thing. So, you know, it's not an easy task at all. And we need to, we need to you know, take stock of who we are and begin to change. And if the state leadership doesn't recognise that, well, we're going through another period of time where we'll be marching backwards.
It could actually be more damaging because I think the frustration is continuing to grow, isn't it? It's not going to go away.
Yes, it is. And the more we argue amongst ourselves publicly, the less likely the more recent veterans and certainly serving people are to come and join us. They can't be stuffed with this sort of nonsense. If they're going to join us, they want to join us for a particular purpose. Some of it is to get support. Some of it is to be able to meet up with people who've had like experiences, and some of them really want to help. But they don't want to be involved in unnecessary administrative procedures. They don't want to be involved in you know, fights over patches of ground or all that sort of stuff. They just want to get on and be who they are and contribute.
So, David, I want to close out on a couple of points. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you, given that, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground in half an hour, and it's been terrific to get your views on some of those issues, and I guess sort of bat those few issues around. What would your advice be for those people who are working hard and driving for reform at the moment? What's your advice to the reformers?
What it's always been, keep it up, but remember who you're talking to. You're trying to convince a fairly staid membership to change. So, you know, attacking them and attacking what they've held dear all these years in the way that they are at the moment with, you've got to say, immoderate language, is not going to build support. And we all want the same thing. We want change. We want to move into the future. And the young guys they're impatient for change, and I can understand that. And that's not necessarily bad either. But it's like what we're taught in the military. Know your enemy. It's not so much the enemy, but you've got to know your audience. You've got to talk the language they understand and put your proposition in a way that they can absorb and perhaps accept. So, you know, using aggressive language in this area, I don't think is very helpful, unfortunately. I mean, these guys, they're passionate. They want change. They see a way in the future. We mightn't all necessarily agree on the detail of that, but we all agree that there needs to be change. And we have an opportunity at the moment to perhaps bring change about, but we need to know who on earth we're talking to and who we need to convince that change is necessary if we're going to be successful.
It's excellent advice, David. And I think probably to round this part of the conversation out, what would your advice be to those people who are in leadership right now?
Listen to the voices. You mightn't like the way they're expressing it. You mightn't like some of the things they're saying, but listen to the voices, because these voices represent something like what the future is going to hold for us all. So to ignore them, to bunker down, to threaten with disciplinary processes is, to my mind, not a very helpful approach, because, you know, somewhere on the line we have to reconcile if we're going to go ahead, and we mustn't burn bridges unnecessarily.
It's an excellent point to finish on, David, and thanks so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Mark.